The wild turkey is one of the most recognizable birds in North America, serving as a cultural icon that represents an entire holiday, an important food staple, and a fascinating species for nature lovers to enjoy looking at in the field. These birds have truly been a part of American life ever since the creation of the country. If you're a birder or a birdwatcher, there's a good chance that you recognize the wild turkey as a fairly common animal to see around farm fields and open woodlands. However, this wasn't always the case. There was actually a time in American history when the wild turkey was in massive trouble as a species, and a few somewhat unlikely sources came to the aid of this now flourishing bird and helped them come back from the brink. To truly know the story of the wild turkey, we first need to understand it as a species. The wild turkey would be an extremely difficult bird to misidentify. They're very large, dwarfing most other North American species, with the exception of a few birds such as large raptors, swans, and cranes. They have brown bodies that can shine with iridescence in the right light. They have barring on their wings and show copper coloration on their tail feathers, with light tan or white on the ends of these feathers. Overall, the coloration of the wild turkey actually makes them quite beautiful when you get the chance to see them up close. The most notable feature of all turkeys is their featherless head. The lack of feathers on the wild turkey's head reveals their blue and red skin. Males have noticeable red wattles and a flap of skin just above their bill called a snoot, which makes them look quite different than the ordinary bird. They can oftentimes be seen with their feathers up, displaying to females, and looking absolutely massive. Domesticated turkeys can look extremely similar to wild turkeys, but also come in different colors, with white being one of the most common colors. Wild turkeys are non-migratory birds, residing in the entirety of most states, with the exception of some of the western states such as Nevada, Colorado, and Utah, as these are places where their range is a little more sparse. In addition to the continental United States, turkeys also roam free in a large portion of northern and central Mexico, as well as some parts of southern Canada. Wild turkeys can be found in a pretty wide array of habitats. Some of the most common places to find them are forests with clearings and a more open canopy. They also thrive in savannas and even in more wooded neighborhoods, where they can be seen in backyards and sometimes even come to bird feeders, where these large birds look out of place as they pick seeds up off the ground. Aside from eating human-provided seeds, wild turkeys are extremely fond of acorns and other tree nuts, including beech and hickory. They also eat a variety of native seeds, as well as some fruits. While they usually forage along the ground, and will even dig in the soil to find food, they also climb up into trees to pick buds, seeds, and fruits. Turkeys have a long history of being important to humans. They are one of only a few species of domesticated birds native to North America. They are also one of the oldest domesticated species in the New World. So old, in fact, that they were already domesticated before Europeans ever arrived on the scene. In the 1500s, Spanish explorers visiting Mexico were introduced to turkeys as domesticated animals by the natives. The birds were brought back to Europe, where they quickly became farm animals, coveted for their value as food. Funny enough, when European colonists came to America, they brought turkeys, a native North American species, back from Europe to what would become the United States when they settled on the Atlantic coast. It is said that turkeys were aboard some of the earliest ships to make the journey to the New World, making these birds somehow both a true Native American species, as well as a European colonist. In the years after European settlers arrived in North America, turkeys were involved in some events that would lead to cultural significance. The first Thanksgiving feast occurred, in which turkey was most likely a dish served. We all know how that played out in the long run, with turkey being an extremely common dish at Thanksgiving in modern times as well. Later on, Ben Franklin mentioned the turkey when the seal of the Society of the Cincinnati was being designed. The backstory is that some people pointed out that the eagle on the seal looked more like a turkey. Ben Franklin had this to say on the matter: "For my own part, I wish the bald eagle had not been chosen as the representative of our country. He is a bird of bad moral character. For in truth, the turkey is in comparison a much more respectable bird. He is besides, though a little vain and silly, a bird of courage, and would not hesitate to attack a grenadier of the British Guards who should presume to invade his farmyard with a red coat on." This hilarious quote, which was trimmed slightly for the sake of brevity, in which Ben Franklin disparages the bald eagle and talks at least somewhat highly of the turkey, is where the common misnomer that he wanted the turkey to be America's national bird comes from. With turkeys living wild throughout the United States, being brought over from other countries, and at least by one important U.S. founder being held in relatively high esteem, the future looked bright for this large American bird. Sadly, things quickly went south for the wild turkey. With European settlers spreading across the country, more and more pressure was placed on wild turkey populations. More and more habitat was cleared to make space for new homes and farms, and these birds were completely eliminated from many states and territories. By the time Thanksgiving was declared a national holiday in 1863, wild turkeys had vanished from many states altogether, including Wisconsin, Kansas, Ohio, New York, Vermont, and many more. In fact, wild turkey populations cumulatively crashed so hard that some people even predicted that extinction was just around the corner, as there was only an estimated 30,000 individual birds left in the wild by the time the 1930s rolled around. While this number doesn't sound nearly as dire as some other species such as whooping cranes, whose numbers dropped to around 20, for a bird that once had an expansive range and such a large population, this was definitely a species legitimately at risk of going extinct in the wild. There were still domesticated turkeys alive and well on farms and in captivity, but these birds were now quite different from their wild counterparts, even though they shared a common ancestry and DNA. By the time the turkey populations truly reached their low point, some people had started to recognize the immediate need for aid to not just the wild turkey, but other animals as well, such as the American bison, that had also reached a critical low in terms of population. The first bit of help came in 1937, when the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act was passed, which put a federal tax on guns and ammunition for the purpose of getting funds for wildlife and habitat restoration. This was important because it meant that hunters were directly paying into funds to help the species they wanted to hunt. This new source of money was instrumental in the beginning of conservation for the wild turkey and many other species. In addition to help from the US government, a very unlikely ally also helped wild turkeys recover around this time, the Great Depression. What was an absolutely catastrophic time in the lives of the American people, inadvertently helped create habitat for wild turkeys. Many of the farms across the country had to be abandoned because the owners could no longer financially care for the property. This allowed for the natural vegetation to retake the land, making for perfect habitat for turkeys and other animal species as well. When the Great Depression ended, attention could be turned back to the restoration of America's wilderness and the species that had been hit hard during this time and in the decades prior. An effort was made to try and reintroduce turkeys to the places they had been extirpated from. The first idea was to release wild turkeys crossbred with domesticated turkeys back into the wild. These efforts failed miserably, as domesticated turkeys had completely lost the necessary skills to forage and survive in the wild. Therefore, wild turkeys bred with domesticated turkeys led to offspring that simply couldn't be successfully released. With raising birds not working, the next thing to try was relocating them. Wild turkeys were taken from places that they were already successfully surviving in and moved to areas with suitable habitat where conservationists and scientists hoped they could survive in. This process was quite successful, and by the year 1952, the population that once dwindled to 30,000 had worked its way back up to over 300,000. In the 1970s, the population of wild turkeys in some states reached a level where hunting resumed. This time around, however, regulations were added to make sure the rampant overhunting would no longer be an issue. Additionally, an organization called the NWTF was created in 1973. The NWTF is dedicated specifically to the conservation of the wild turkey, as well as preserving the American heritage of hunting. Over time, money raised for the conservation of the wild turkey from government policy, coupled with efforts by organizations like the NWTF, helped the species to recover to a point where they stabilized. In modern times, global wild turkey populations have soared compared to what they used to be, with around 7 million birds roaming across the forests, fields, and backyards of North America. They actually have an even more expansive range than they once did, currently residing in every state with the exception of Alaska. Overall, the tale of the wild turkey is one of the greatest conservation success stories in American history, and one that probably isn't talked about enough. It's a story of cooperation between hunters and conservationists, reminding us that sometimes help can come from even the most seemingly unlikely of sources, all in the name of saving something that we love. If you like this video, check one of these videos out next, and as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Badgerland Birding.